And sometimes the business model that you are looking at, if you are a big company acquiring a smaller one, might not simply apply if you try to integrate the smaller bit that is very agile and very fast into your big organization. You might lose all these advantages that they came with, right? So it's always a bet for the future, and it's never sure that it will really pay out. You only know it at the end. But not having a change management process in place to make sure that you get to whatever you are planning to get to is obviously planning for disaster, because there is no plan factually.
So, a very warm welcome to today's amontis business panel. If you can't afford change management for your acquisition, you can't afford your acquisition. This is our topic today. And I'm sending out a very, very warm welcome to our audience, seeing there are people from all over the world. This is exciting. The format may be well known by now, maybe not. It's a short keynote introducing the topic, followed by an expert panel discussion. My name is Arlette Dumont Voitel. I'm your host today, and I'm very excited to introduce to you our keynote speaker today, Markus Hahn. Markus conducts HR due diligences and manages carve-outs or integrations of acquired organizations for the SAP group globally for over 10 years. As a certified project management professional, he uses either agile or classic project management methodologies. Markus has 20 years of experience in HR management, in automotive, mechanical engineering, and IT. He holds a law degree from the University of Trier and a master's degree in international business law from the University of St. Gallen. Markus, the stage is yours. I'm very much looking forward to your keynote.
Hi there. Yeah, welcome. A warm welcome from my side as well. Thank you very much, Arlette. Yeah, change management is a topic. Let me share my my presentation. Give me a second. Okay, if you can't afford integrated change management for your acquisition, you can't afford your acquisition itself. Yeah, is that about money? Let's have a look into it. What are we talking about? I mean, my daily business is about acquisitions, mergers, carve-outs, you name it, for SAP Group globally. Due to the time zone, I myself is mainly focusing on the region of EMEA. EMEA stands here for European, Middle East, and Africa. Yeah, it is about transactions and deals and projects of these types. And all this is always focusing on organizations. I mean, in minimum, we are talking about 2 organizations. One organization is acquiring the others. That sometimes we are merging 2 organizations, or we are carving out a organization of an existing organization. What is an organization? I mean, once you look at the scientific definition of an organization, it is a collection of people who are pursuing a joint objective based on work sharing. It is about people. Yeah, it's all about people. And when we are talking about people, we are talking about the change management. Change management deals with people, and it should enable, it should support, or it should secure the intended change of an organization. So my business is dealing with people. So, and that's mainly change management. Change management, once you're focusing on change management over the last years, you will find a lot of surveys, a lot of researches on change management within transactions of these types. And there is a lot of statements that the change management fails. You can see it here, some examples on that slide here. Yeah, because of poor change management, bad change management, little change management. There are a lot of surveys on that. But why? Why is that happening? Why is change management so difficult? Is it because maybe it is because of money? Yeah, let's have a look into at least my experiences. The main issue with change management is these activities are not measurable. There are no KPIs available. Let's have a look into a deal transaction. Let's have a look at the decision takers. The decision takers are financially under a huge pressure, right? There is a huge purchase price to be paid. There is a huge amount of transactional costs. Let's have a look on consultants, on law firms. There are huge budgets within such a business case dealing with retention management. And now when it comes to the transactional cost, you have to justify money for change management. And if there are no KPIs, you cannot justify these budgets anymore. Once we look at the board has to be or is responsible versus the supervisory board or versus the shareholders, right? So every money which is spent in these activities need to be justified. So it need to be measurable. Otherwise, the business case is not successful. And we are looking mainly in short term, mid-term, and long term, right? So it is really complex for decision takers to invest the money into change management activities. Once we are talking about money, let's have another look at money. Time is money. In particular, while transactions. I told you, you have invested a lot of money to purchase an organization, right? So your main interest is that business runs, right? You have clear expectations according to the organization you have acquired. Scalability, right? So mainly you are focusing first on business continuity and you are preparing the transition itself. This is priority number one. You do not have the time with your sales force. And I come from the IT business, so we are talking about development people, right? So there is no time for workshops with these guys to sit down and to discuss about cultural, let's say, concerns, things like this. No, it is about business continuity. We have to earn the money we have invested into the deal, right? So business continuity and the transition itself, the preparation and the execution of that transition is priority number one. We need to leverage the synergies, right? So here it is really complex, or let's say difficult to justify, to carve out time for change management. Another point might be a broad and an unspecific understanding regarding change management. Sometimes I hear, oh, we are communicating a lot to these people, to the acquired organization and internally to the acquirer, right? We are communicating. That's change management. Okay, good. This is your understanding on change management. In other deals or in other transactions, I have learned there is a change manager, there is a dedicated change management, so we are doing change management. Okay, that's change management. Once we are talking about huge programs like we would run once we are acquiring a whole group of legal entities, being a group, then you have different people, you have different work streams dealing with that acquisition itself and later on with the integration. Hence, you need to have change management across all the work streams. You need to clarify with all the managers that they are change managers. You have to look at key people who are in charge as change managers. You have to prepare your communication, which is part of change management. Yeah, right. So there is very often you need an integrated strategy for change management, dealing with all the work streams, with all the stakeholders within the transaction itself, within the integration itself, right? So once we are talking about change management, you need to specify and you need to create such a change management strategy, right? Another point in this regard, when it comes to change management, might be, or at least this is my observation in transactions I have contributed to, is little expertise and knowledge once you have to combine hard facts and soft facts. Hard facts means, in this regard, it's about employment law, maybe a balance of interests or project management. On the other hand, soft fact is communication strategies, workshop designs and methodologies, maybe psychological understanding, where the people are, what do the people feel. And if you're able to combine this is, from my perspective, an integrated change management. And you need, let's say, agents, you need people, project leads or change managers who are able to act on both sides of the game, to act on both levels, to have both challenges in focus. I would like to give you here a short example what I mean. We made a carve out. We were selling a global business to a purchaser, and for this business, the regional vice president sales for the region EMEA sits in Spain. This individual sits in Spain. He is managing the sales force for a whole region. And like I said, this business we have sold to a purchaser. Now this individual has real concerns and fears about his individual employment contract, because he has to sign a transition agreement to get over to the buyer, right? And this individual is really nervous about, what does this mean to me in case the transaction is delayed, in case the buyer cannot answer my questions, how to deal with that, right? So this individual is really concerned. Now you have to talk to this individual. You scheduling a meeting with this guy. And first thing you do is to give the transaction, to give the employer a face. Yeah, you're saying, my name is XYZ, I'm responsible, and I will talk to you now and try to give you the answers. The first thing you need to do in such a meeting with this guy is to listen to his concerns and his complaints. Maybe you as transaction lead has made some mistakes, so you have to listen to these things and yes, sorry, yeah, we made a mistake in here. Maybe you can explain the reasons. Then you explain the whole deal structure and the process, and then you're focusing on the individual question of this of this guy, right? You explain what are the protection clauses in this contract. You will confirm to this individual, hey, we will support you, I'm listening to you, and in case you have any additional questions, I will help. You need to tell the individual in such a talk about his individual role as role model, because everyone in his team is looking at him as a vice president. So make clear to him which role he is in, and in the end you can tell him, hey, we are appreciating your engagement and we are thanking you for your support in here, right? And this, our change manager did this talk, and afterwards this guy was signing his agreement. We're moving over to the buyer, and as a role model, the whole Spanish team was following him, and now he's managing the sales force at the buyer. What I want to say or to tell you with this little example in a nutshell, talking to this guy, you are changing the levels, or let's say in that interview or in that meeting, you are changing the dimensions in which you are acting. sometimes on the hard facts, sometimes on the soft facts. You need to be, let's say, secure in both of these levels to run such a successful talk. And this is what I mean is combining hard facts and soft facts, taking the people where they are, but giving them real information and confirmation. This is something what I see as integrated change management, dealing with individuals, and should be, I mean, this you can scale to a whole strategy for complex transactions. That's in a nutshell. Bottom line, it is not about the money. Why change management is so complex, it's even more. That's in a nutshell is my keynote to change management in transactions.
Thank you very much, Marcus, for your thought-provoking and very personal keynote. I think that painted a really good picture to start off the discussion now. So I'd like to take the opportunity to now introduce our expert panel members, starting with Carsten Ohrmann. Hello, Carsten. Our first panel expert today is Carsten Ohrmann. He's an internationally acclaimed consultant, coach, and speaker. And he brings a very compelling mix of mechanical engineering, global senior leadership, natural sciences, and psychology to the table. According to Carsten, consciousness is the essential ingredient to create a better life, a better business, and a better world. Welcome, Carsten.
Thanks.
Our second panel expert is Ingo Kusch. Ingo, hi. Ingo is Director, Mergers and Acquisition in the Global Business Services Department of Procter & Gamble. For more than 10 years, he's been leading various acquisitions and divestiture projects for P&G, focusing on the integration of manufacturing sites. He's a passionate trainer for project management, innovation, and mindfulness. Welcome.
Hello.
And last but not least, Roland Dumont Voitel. Roland looks back on many years of experience in consulting and managing corporations through tough times of turnarounds, as well as coaching senior managers to find their ways in times of changes and mergers and acquisitions. A very warm welcome to all of you. I'm very excited about this discussion, and let's jump right into it. Marcus left us with the closing line, "It's not the money." Ingo, as a PMI practitioner, you're no stranger to integration issues. Does Marcus' closing lines match your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely underscore that one. I mean, the money for change management is really negligible if you compare it to the overall transaction cost usually. So it's really not about the money. What we have seen quite often in the past is that it's really down to the experience of the business leader of such a deal. We often have the situation that there are senior business leaders from maybe marketing or finance leading those deals. And for many of them, it's like a stepstone in their own career. So they have been assigned because of their business experience, but they do not necessarily have that much integration or divestiture experiences. And especially if it comes to integration, they should better know what they're doing, and they should better have seen some of the deals before. And that where a kind of not well-knowing and long-term standing organization that is typically doing these deals is helpful to guide these people to avoid the typical traps that they can step into. So for me, most often you see that these people are simply inexperienced, and this leads to communication gaps, and it leads to wrong perceptions that they give, or too simplified integration, or let's say change management strategies, like things like let's get the best of both worlds and things like that, which sound really great in the beginning, but people have different expectations towards what that means. And those expectations can obviously be disappointed in the course of the deal when you are starting to find out what's best. What does it mean for both companies, and what does it mean for the employees? And then some people might think in the process that this wasn't the best choice, but that depends on how you are seeing the facts. So the experience of the leaders is really important, that they have done this before.
I'm gathering a bit of a Groundhog Day situation. You're starting over from scratch every time. Carsten, you're not a stranger to M&A either, as I know. Does that match your experience as well? Is it the money?
Yeah, it's interesting because there is money in terms of expenditure when we have to pay some bills caused by change management. And there is money in terms of the impact that the lack of proper change management has on the transaction. So I think there are two types of costs here. One is the cost, which is an operational expenditure for change management, and the other is the cost, which basically can harm the underlying business case when we talk about what is the implication of a lack of proper change management.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that actually touches on the question of the KPIs, right? It's hard to measure. And Marcus was saying that this is one of the major issues that change management is facing, that it's not necessarily about the budget or the cost itself, but because it's so intangible and hard to grasp what we're actually getting for your money. The question, or my next question would be, maybe Roland, you can develop on that a little bit. Is it really impossible to measure change management, the effects or the return on change management?
Thank you for the question. I would build on what Carsten just said. At the end of the day, it's about money, the one way or the other. If you can't afford change management, it means you can afford all the losses to lose when you lose your best performers, when you lose competencies, capabilities, etc. So I think we fall into a certain trap. There is a slogan saying, if you can't measure, you can't manage, and we just turn it around. So we believe we can't measure and therefore we don't manage, or refrain from managing change. I think we just have to think about certain approaches like risk management. Risk management would look at the strategy you have, identify the risk, and then make assessments about the impact if something doesn't turn as you planned. You would make assumptions about the situation. You would make estimates about the probability. All this is very qualitative because you don't know exactly what the future will be. But you would build around that with risk management. And in fact, change management to understand how much you have to invest in order to convince those who finance this. I think that's the right approach. We know from other areas what it means if you have to invest, for example, in quality management, and change management is very similar. You have the cost of conformance to certain measures that are necessary and the cost of non-conformance. That is, if you don't do that, what happens then? And looking at this cost of non-conformance, which means that if you fail with certain things to retain maybe certain good capabilities, what does it cost? What would happen? So where are the critical points and what is the probability that here something could happen? Is it worth investing or not? And then you have this curve of diminishing returns. That is, you add the one action to the next until you see that probability times impact has a certain value that you can afford and is not too extreme. That's the approach that we have to take in this change management, because yes, we have people that count on KPIs, financial things, etc. But it's our hand, it's our reflection to develop metrics and measures that can help to integrate that in the overall approach. So that's a point where I'm a little bit different to what Marcus has said. I think it is possible, and I'm sure that here and there elements of this are taken into account, but this can be used in a much broader sense, starting from stakeholder analysis down to this calculation of probabilities, of impacts, etc., and then calculating the risk that is behind how much you can invest for change management.
Thank you very much. Carsten, I've got the impression you would like to reply to that. Am I getting the right feeling, or?
No, I think it is everything is possible. That is my sort of mantra, right? So I think what Roland has just mentioned is it is indeed everything is possible. The question is just really the how, right? And how do we do this? And I think, I mean, I'm coming from a more of a holistic kind of perspective when I'm looking at these kind of things. And so I would probably encourage everyone who is sort of either in charge of a merger and integration or is probably interested in it or is affected by it. So this is probably interesting to see here as well. We are talking about three different entities here from my point of view. We are talking about the seller, we are talking about the buyer, but we're also talking about the unit or the product, if you may say it, right? So it's basically three different entities that we need to consider, because the buyer has a certain interest, the seller has a certain interest, but the guys who are sold or bought have a certain interest as well. And I think this is part of what I consider as important when we actually pursue a holistic perspective, that we really understand that we need to deal with all of those three elements. And that is on the highest level. I think it also comes to the challenge to really look into all of the stakeholders. I mean, we do stakeholder analysis in all of the projects, whatever we do. We always talk about who are the stakeholders and how are they affected. But I think this is exactly what we ought to do here as well if we want to do successful either mergers or carve-outs or joint ventures or whatever it is. We need to understand really what the stakeholders are concerned about, what their interests are, and so on.
Mm. Thank you very much. This kind of brings me back to Marcus' point of the change management strategy. And he also pointed out that, everybody kind of has a different understanding of change management. Ingo, may I throw you into the cold water and ask you, what is change management? What is it? And what is a change management strategy? What are we actually talking about?
Well, that's a difficult exam question, so I try to do my best to answer this correctly. So change management is about bringing two organizations, in this case, from an as-is status to a to-be status and helping them to get there. So it's not the hard project management per se, so that obviously needs to happen too, but it's also the process to take the right decisions. Like if you are signing a deal, you typically have very basic information. You don't have all the details of all the stuff that you are buying. You don't have all the visibility into all the systems that are there. You don't know about all the business processes that are at stake. And the change management process is trying to get a better understanding of that and putting in guardrails on how to take the decisions during the way. Yeah, if you have two organizations that are merging with each other, both organizations want to have a say, and you need to have some rules around who is deciding what. So for me, this change management process is making sure that there is a process in place that will help those two organizations to come to a common understanding of what needs to happen and then to execute against it. Because otherwise you will have just a culture clash. Everybody has good ideas about what's best for everyone. But during the course of such a complex deal, you typically find out some things work well for one side, but maybe not for the other. And then what is the best solution for both sides? And that's exactly where all the discussions come up, because you have two organizations competing for the same resources. There's a joint integration budget. There is a joint set of jobs that are available. There is a joint future vision of how the organization should look like. And that's where those two organizations are competing with. And for me, the change management process is necessary to help both organizations to find their place in that space and to make clear that where do we want to go to, what is the ultimate target of this acquisition, and what are the typical ways to get there. So what are the decision points that we need to take, and how do we take those decisions at that point in time so that nobody feels completely run over by whatever is going on there.
I would probably just on that note, Ingo, I would probably want to relate to something back what Marcus has said when he came up with the definition of what an organization is, meaning a group of people who basically pursue a joint objective. I mean, that is the headline of the organization. And what you've just said, I think, is absolutely relevant in this context, because when we are talking about objectives here, we have organization A, which has an objective. We have organization B, which has an objective. And obviously, in a perfect world, the objectives within each organization would be already joined. But if you then bring two organizational aspects together, that doesn't automatically mean that you have a joint objective or a joint purpose. So what we need to do is actually, if we would want to merge something, I think in merger it's even more prominent than in carve-outs, but if we would want to bring something together, we need to create that joint objective, that joint purpose, because they might have got different starting points and different directions even. And if we can't combine this joint, or if we can't create a joint objectives, we won't be able to create an organizational unit.
Yeah, this is really nice. It makes me think of what you mentioned before, Ingo, that you can take a talk about the same word also. You know, you may have the joint objective, but completely different connotations, completely different understanding of what good or bad or successful or quality may be like.
Yeah, exactly. And
may
that
have
always,
to fix that first.
yeah, absolutely. And that depends 100% on the perspective, right? If you are a big company acquiring a smaller business unit, then usually the rules are somewhat set in stone, because usually the tail doesn't wiggle with the dog. But if you, for instance, buy a business unit that is strong within the corporation and they want to set standards, then they still have to accept the fact that there is an organization they are merging into. Even though they are a strong part and a new business unit, there's still an overall legal entity framework that they need to adhere to. And they come with their own little perspective. They come with their own perspective on how a company should be run, but they still need to merge into something that might be bigger than them. And that's exactly where all these discussions are coming from. And you need to have these clear guidelines and clear directions into which it should go, because otherwise you are ending up in endless strategy discussions about, do we do it that way or this way? And as said, we are competing against around the same resources, and that will tie up so much time and effort that you cannot really proceed on the important work. We heard that from Markus as well. Transition is key and business continuity is key. And those discussions disturb both factors. Yeah, the business continuity gets hurt when the people are getting upset about decisions they don't understand because they haven't gotten the strategy in the first place laid out by the change management. And also the transition will be impeded because you're continuing to discuss possible ways forward. And that's dangerous.
But this basically relates straight back to being able to afford not performing change management, as it hurts that business continuity that the business leaders are trying to upkeep so badly. Roland, you've seen the good, the bad, and the mediocre,
and the ugly.
From basically every perspective, as an employee being affected, as somebody consulting in it, as a beneficiary of one as well. How does that resonate with your experience?
Well, looking back what Ingo, Carsten, Markus explained, I think we share the same world. So we're not talking about different animals. And maybe an example that fits quite nicely of what has been said by Carsten and Ingo. I remember one of these mergers I was part of, and it was well organized and well planned on the top view. So they spent a lot of money before the deal, studying the culture, understanding the culture, etc. But then they used this study to really make a selling campaign. So holistically seen, yeah, fantastic. You shared with the employees all those benefits for the future of the two companies coming together, being great, etc. But there are different layers. And what they forgot is that you have to detect the critical areas of high performers, of the real competencies that are critical in the one or the other area, how the daily routine will work, etc. And missing that, what happened was that after a certain lapse of time, there was this departure. Some of the high performers left the company, although top management thought they had done everything perfectly. But it was just on a very broad overall picture and just for selling the good arguments to the rest of the people, believing that with this expectancy theory approach, they could convince everyone. But everyone is in his little world. And you have to look at that and find ways, from continuous improvement logic to the scenario of what are the critical competence areas that I mentioned before. What happens if they fall out? Are they critical? So we would calculate about the estimation about risk, etc. It's part of the strategy development for these approaches. And insofar, before you do a deal, you have time. Once you approach to the deal, the time squeezes. So the question is to do it early enough. And what we found in our boot camps for merger acquisition that we are doing with our customers, to realize that all this post-merger integration, all this part, is not really part of the strategy. They are not really seen as equal levels because they don't see that these are the people that at the end make it what Marcus said, we need to leverage the synergies. And that is the problem. In most cases, the synergies are not leveraged because exactly that is missing. And it is because it's missing on different levels, layers in the organization, and it's therefore not leveraged and it's not taken into account.
I would probably just add to this, Roland, one aspect which you have already highlighted, which is about what's happening before the transaction really happens. All of this planning, all of that preparation, that is so tremendously important. I would probably go as far as claiming that if this preparation phase, the business case evaluation, if that is not done properly, then the integration later on or the transaction is almost about to fail. I mean, it's probably a bit polarizing what I'm saying here, but I think the preparation is really an interesting and a very important thing here. And I think
just, if I may say, you just point the right thing. If you are not participating in the business case, it's not part of the case.
Yes, yes. And whilst we are talking about business case, I think here is one of these fundamental traps which I see in this entire kind of merger acquisition kind of scenario here is really, how do we evaluate the business case? What do we take into account? On what basis do we actually make a decision whether we go ahead with a transaction, yes or no? Do we have all of the various aspects? Have we all taken them into account or not? Do we probably fall into some blind spots? Is this deliberate ignorance because we don't want to see these difficult areas? Or is it probably because we simply can't quantify qualitative aspects of it? So I think there are so many things. So I would probably say if we would have these transactions prepared in a fully fledged inclusive business case where all of the various aspects are taken into account seriously, nothing ignored, nothing made more popular than the other, I think then we would have more realistic business cases. I personally feel that we have a bit of an ignorance in the decision-making units on the board levels when it comes to making decisions about transactions, because very often the political or the profit aspect is rated very, very high in this. It's probably just something which is good it's good to be perceived as I'm the new CEO, I'm buying something and so on. So that doesn't necessarily make a business, there is no business reason for this. This is more a personal reason of profiling of the leading figure. I mean, I'm just bringing this as an example. What I'm trying to say is that the business case decision, the evaluation of the business case has various aspects. And I think somehow these aspects are very often flavored. And hence we are often making also wrong business case decisions.
May I add something?
One little thing, and I'd like to Ingo a question.
I would just add to this business case, because you're absolutely right. The one is that people forget that not mentioning an item in the strategy means that this item is non-existent. So not including the risk of a lousy or not existing change management in the business case means it will not happen. Nothing will happen. Everything will go smoothly. And we know that it will not. But our case is doing as if, and that's one of the biggest problems. And the definition of risk is very narrow in this community you were just quoting. So it is very narrow in the sense it is just a small, more very often financial risk, and not really the risk of transforming, of acceptance, of following, of buy-in, of adoption. And it's just risk. It's not the opportunities, which can have the same effect as the risk. Now, Ingo.
Yeah, exactly.
Patiently, and I could see him burning and nodding and burning and trying. Very polite. Thank you very much for that.
We need to be aware that all these business cases, they are all bets for the future, right? And typically the decision makers, they do not really know how it turns out, because we don't know what will be the final impact on the organization. And as you already pointed out before, if we lose some of the key folks there, then we might lose all the capabilities of the organization easily, quickly. And sometimes the business model that you are looking at, if you are a big company acquiring a smaller one, might not simply apply if you try to integrate the smaller bit that is very agile and very fast into your big organization. You might lose all these advantages that they came with, right? So it's always a bet for the future, and it's never sure that it will really pay out. You only know it at the end. But not having a change management process in place to make sure that you get to whatever you are planning to get to is obviously planning for disaster, because there is no plan factually. And you will just go blind in the fog and you don't know where to come out with. So I think it's absolutely critical to know exactly what you want to get to and make sure that you have the planks in place to get there, including the change management and the organizational impact and strategies to get there.
You know that the problem with the future is the uncertainty.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah,
it's unknown. Yeah. Well, these are really nice final words. And looking at the time, I'm already getting to wrapping up the session. Thank you very, very much so far. I'd like to capture your final thoughts, Dave, before we close the session. And maybe Ingo, you get to start.
Yeah, change management is absolutely crucial for mergers and acquisitions. That if you don't spend time on thinking about that, you better do not get started, because failing to plan is planning to fail. And this in particular with change management, where people are involved, emotions are involved, future careers are involved. And the people that are the highest performers in the organization, they obviously have alternatives outside of the organization, and they don't need to get through this mess if you really, really screw it up. So it's absolutely important to think about where do we come from, where do we want to go to, and what are meaningful, rational ways to get there that are understood by the people, so that everybody can understand all the decisions that are being made in the process of executing the transition, because you don't know all the details in the beginning and you have to learn as you go. And there, a clear strategy and a clear change management approach on how to get there is absolutely necessary. And it shouldn't be a question of money here, because otherwise you are dumping the whole investment. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much. Roland, do you want to follow on with your closing line?
Well, otherwise I leave the time for Carsten. No, maybe just a very little word. That is, it's a lot about the maturity of the counterparts. The worst thing that can happen in merger acquisition and all these carve-outs, etc., is that one party is not mastering the process. And if you don't know the rules of the game, if you don't understand the mechanics, if you have not a clue about what change of people means, that is the greatest risk at all. And maybe this is overlooked in too many cases, where maybe the one side is professional, but the other is not. And what then happens, you can imagine people are going back, are leaving the thing, etc. That is one of the big problems. So it's not just looking at how you are, but also how professional is your counterpart.
Thank you. Carsten, you get to wrap it up.
Yeah, thank you. For those of you who already know me, I can't wrap it up without mentioning the word consciousness in here. So it's, from my point of view, consciousness is a big ingredient in this, because we, as both Ingo and Roland have said already, we need to be aware. We need to be aware about who are we dealing with and so on. But I would probably bring this one step further, even to say we need to be conscious about the various stakeholders. And even there, I would mean probably down to the individual level, because what we need in order to create a joint organizational purpose, a joint objective, is the buy-in of the people, of the stakeholders involved. And in order to create that buy-in, we need to understand, as Ingo has said it before, it's like the status quo, to bring that from the starting point to a desired point in the future. So we need to understand how the stakeholders actually think, how they feel, and how they react today. And then we need to have got the right means in place in order to bring them, in order to take them onto a journey where we can actually lead them towards a new thinking, a new feeling, and a new behavior in the future.
Thank you so much. So we started with a statement: if you can't afford change management for your acquisition, you can't afford your acquisition. I think the point is made. And I would like to leave it at that. And thank you very much for your contributions. Markus, maybe you can switch on your camera once again and say goodbye from your side. Thank you so much for your impulse and your keynote. The next amontis Business Panel is going to happen on Thursday, the 10th of December. Please come back. We'd like to see you again. Join us on LinkedIn or subscribe to the YouTube channel if you want to remain up to speed, up to date on what we're doing. And there's going to be more of this. Thank you very, very much. Have all a very great evening and stay safe and healthy.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.